All right, guys. So if you want to follow with today's notes, we are in the workbook, and we're going to be starting on page 184 if you have yours. So what we're talking about today is, like we already mentioned, the hypotenuse leg. And so example number 2, asks us what information is needed in order to apply the hypotenuse leg. All right, so just kind of a note. First thing is it has to be a right triangle. Okay, second, the hypotenuses have to be congruent. Okay, and then we also have to have corresponding legs. Okay, so if we look at this right here, okay, we already know that angle M and angle Q equal 90 degrees, right? So they're both right triangles. Okay, next, we know that the hypotenuse, which is the side opposite 90 degrees, is 9, right? So the hypotenuse in the other triangle, PR, also has to equal 9. Okay, so right now we know our hypotenuses are congruent, and we have to have another leg. So if you look here in this triangle PQR, we have the short side is 5. So in this triangle, our short side also has to be 5. So MN has to equal 5. So now, because the hypotenuses are congruent and a leg is congruent in a triangle, we can say the entire triangle is congruent. All right, so if we flip over to the do you know how, okay, the question asks what information is needed to prove the triangles are congruent using the hypotenuse leg theorem. All right, so if we look at what we have here, the first triangle, it doesn't indicate that this is a right triangle, okay? And so in order for these to be congruent using the hypotenuse leg, they both have to be a right triangle. So angle L has to equal 90 degrees. And so now we've got KM is congruent to RQ, that's our hypotenuse. KL is congruent to PQ, and that's the long leg. All right, so we can say that those are congruent now if L is equal to 90. All right, for 6, okay, one thing, I want to go ahead and peel these apart real quick just to get a better idea of what these triangles look like and what information that we know. All right, so currently we know this is 90 degrees. Because they share this side, we know those are congruent, right? So what else do we need to know, all right? So in triangle USV, angle S has to equal 90 degrees, okay? That's one thing that we know. We also need to know the hypotenuse, right? So the hypotenuse is TU over here. This has to be congruent to UV, right? So TU has to be congruent to UV. Right, so we have to have the hypotenuse, a leg, and they both have to be 90 degrees. Okay. Number 7, information would be sufficient to show the two triangles are congruent by the hypotenuse leg. Very similar up here, but we actually have measurements. So the thing that we want to look at, all right, it already tells us that our hypotenuses are congruent and that they are 90 degrees, right? So if we look at the first triangle, we have the long leg is 28. So over here, we could say our long leg also has to be 28. Okay, so the length of DE could be 28, or, okay, EF, the short leg, is 12. AC could be 12. It doesn't have to be both. It can be one or the other because all we need is the hypotenuse, which is already congruent, and that one of the legs are congruent for the hypotenuse leg. Okay, and the last one here, once again, I'm going to go ahead and split these up just to get a better idea of what information we already have. So it says both of these are 90 degrees. This is QRP. This is RPS. It says this segment is 8. This is 15. They share a side, so these are congruent. Okay, so they're both right triangles. We already have a leg that is congruent, so all we need is the hypotenuse. All we need to know is that this PS right here has to equal 15, and that would be sufficient for the hypotenuse leg. All right, guys, that's all there is for hypotenuse leg.